Narrative, the art of storytelling. In this slide deck, I'm going to be going over the tasks you're going to be doing in your independent study session using the slide deck templates that I've created for each of you in Google Classroom. Now, the focus of this session is to bring attention to the overarching importance of storytelling, narrative, making sense out of chaos. Whether it be graphic design, podcasting, journalism, video, music, any type of media and art has at the heart of it narrative, storytelling. So, we're going to be focused today on this recurrent, crucial, fundamental fact of storytelling being a keystone for our species of Homo sapiens as a way of us communicating and making things make sense. We do it repetitively, always have done, from Paleolithic cave paintings where people would raise a flickering light 200,000 years ago and have the flicker from the flame create this sense of animation, as it were. To animate is to bring to life, while telling these stories orally to one another, through to franchise cinema, YouTube shorts, TikTok and Reels. Storytelling manifests in many different ways, but it's something deeply human. It's built into us as a way of comprehending and making sense of chaos. Roland Barthes is an important figure in what we do in media, and he talks eloquently about narrative and how ever-present it is. In particular, he talks about myth and mythology, something we'll talk more about in year 2, as being crucial to our understanding of semiotics, signs, and the way things are able to communicate consciously, subconsciously to us, to the audience. And we as creative media professionals are tasked with using these semiotics, these signs, these meanings, these connotations, cultural meanings, ethically and morally to communicate, because there's power in creating media. This chap here, Yuval Noah Harari, who wrote Sapiens, talks about the importance of narrative and fiction in particular as being crucial. Fictions such as money, corporations, states, company logos, they are constructions, they are stories, they are narratives that help us to function as a society. The same made-up rules, the same make-believe stories are tools. They are structure. They are necessary for us as humans. In this slide deck, you'll see I've hyperlinked to different theories throughout, so you can jump to different elements after the actual video, or throughout. I'm not going to be watching, am I? I'm on a video. First one's Levi-Strauss and binary oppositions. He argues that at the heart of every story, every tale, every fiction is this contrast, this friction, whether it be up, down, slow, fast, gay, straight, cowboy, Indian, light side, dark side. There is something crucial about the need for that opposition in order for a story and narrative to be propelled forward. Without an opposition, there is no story, according to Levi-Strauss. He says that the construction of all the meaning in story is dependent on these oppositions to some degree, not to all degrees, but to some degree certainly. All stories have characters that we sympathise with and those that we dislike. We take sides typically, don't we? We project and transfer onto the characters at what we call an ideological level. Ideology means our values, our thoughts, our beliefs, what we believe in. So we tend to side with people who have a similar ideological background, context, time and place and history to us, and vilify and make bad guys out of those that do not share said values. Again, narrative stories, they bind and control our societies in many ways. The idea of binary oppositions is a reflection of the way that the human mind works. We tend to keep things, or try to keep things, as neat as possible, don't we? This idea of polarisation that we've seen in the last few years of politics, the us and them, right and wrong, remain or leave, whatever it might be, is somewhat too simple. But the world makes sense, doesn't it, when we put things into these simple narratives? Of course, there is nuance and things are far more complex than this, but media will often try and successfully manage to create these binary oppositions that Levi-Strauss identifies. Now, the slide deck I've created for you has at the heart of it examples and references for you to delve deeper into these theories. What I want to do is to use this video on ClickView and on YouTube for you to be able to use the slide deck I provided you with to make notes, to add answers that relate to either your current project, or if you can't relate it to your current project, then relate it to an example from industry and any media text you can think of. So in this example here, we see Brad Pitt, his character in Seven, his unkempt appearance, unshaven, unironed shirts, somewhat uncombed hair, in his warm and cosy home, somewhat juxtaposed with Morgan Freeman, seen here in the same film Seven, his fastidiously neat, organised, tidy, somewhat sterile home. And even in this snapshot here, you get a sense of that contrast between the two characters. That opposition is crucial to that narrative, to that trajectory of the script in the masterpiece film directed by David Fincher in 94, 95, I believe it was. Not for the faint-hearted, so be warned. Okay, so if you're on ClickView, please give me the answer in the box as to something in your current project that demonstrates binary opposites. If you can't relate it to your current project, relate it to a media text that you've seen, whereby you've seen this opposition between characters or elements or themes within a media text. If you're on YouTube, add a comment underneath. Binary opposites, what examples can you think of? The next one's Roland Barthes and his open and closed and enigma and action codes. So, Roland Barthes, he saw texts, simplistically, I'm describing this now, but he did see texts as a tangled ball of threads in many ways. Texts, whether it be a comic book, whether it be a TV show, whether it be a pop song, as a tangled ball of threads that needs to be unravelled to make sense. So we can separate the colours out and see all the elements, all the codes, as it were, that made up that tangled ball of threads. Once we start to unravel a text, we encounter all the different meanings, all the different codes, all the different signs that are its DNA, as it were. We can start to look at narrative and storytelling in one way, from one viewpoint, one angle, one perspective, bringing to bear one set of previous experience and create one meaning for it based on just one approach. But we can also unravel things from different perspectives and see it from different views until it starts to look different and mean more. By unravelling a narrative from a different angle, we can pull different threads and create entirely different meanings from the different angles and perspectives we look at this tangled ball of threads. Roland Barthes believed that texts can be open and unravelled in lots of different ways. So a film can be pulled out and lots of different meanings and perspectives and angles and depth and artistry can be at the heart of it. Or texts can be closed. You pull that ball of thread and it's just one thread, one meaning, quite simple. Roland Barthes argues that the more open text that we can project our own meanings onto and see from numerous different perspectives tend to be the more artistic and better, let's say. The thread you pull on to try and unravel meaning, he called narrative codes. He's big on codes, old Bart. Codes. We'll talk more about that in our lesson on semiotics coming up soon. Combinations of signs that have different meanings. As part of that, he speaks about enigma and action codes, which are the two central ways in which Roland Barthes believes that we can create suspense in a narrative. So enigma codes, which are one of those threads that come out of an open text, they refer to plot elements that make us ask questions. Why did he pick up that knife? Why did he look that way? Why did she go through that door? Who's that person who just appeared on the screen for a fraction of a second? Why are they wearing that? Why did they say that? Questions, enigma codes, things that are somewhat enigmatic. Why? They make the audience think. Enigma codes make us ask questions. Action codes, these refer to plot developments and actions that lead to more action. Somebody doing something. So somebody stands up for themselves maybe, or perhaps somebody takes something, puts something down, makes a choice, makes an action. Action codes are actions that make us want answers. So enigma codes are things that make us ask questions. Think about a story where you've seen that. Action codes make us want answers. Why did that happen? Makes you seek a resolution. Makes us crave the next step, the next action, as it were. Enigma codes and action codes often go hand in hand, but they're two different elements to driving a story forward. Can you think of any in any story you've encountered? So, again, if you're on ClickView, the box will pop up in just a minute. If you're on YouTube, you might want to put a comment underneath. Tell me about a text or your current project, and can you relate enigma codes and action codes to either your current project or an existing media text? Odorovs' equilibrium. Here's a story for you. There's a frog who is wanting to go home at the end of a busy day, and he needs to get from one side of the pond to the other, because on the other side of the pond is where he lives with his family, his wife and his children waiting for him. He's finished his job and he's trying to get home across the pond to see his family. As he's about to jump onto the first lily pad that takes him from one side to the other back home, a scorpion sidles up to him and says, "Can you give me a lift?" To which the frog says, "Nah, heard about you lot. You sting people. And if I give you a lift, then you'll sting me and can't get home. So, no." Scorpion says, "Well, that doesn't make sense because I'm heading that way as well. I'm struggling. I want to get home to my family. And I want to just ask a favour. Can you give me a lift? I can jump on your head and you can jump us from lily pad to lily pad and get us home. Can you help me?" The frog deliberates, but then thinks, "Oh, I need to go home. I'll just jump on my head." So the scorpion jumps on the frog's head, and sure enough, the frog, with the scorpion on his head, jumps from lily pad to lily pad on his way home. They get onto the second and the third, the fourth. The frog looks up at the scorpion looks down at the frog. They carry on jumping. It's about the 7th, 8th, or 9th. And they're close, they're really close to the other side of the pond where they both say they need to be. As they get one lily pad away from the other side, the scorpion again looks down at the frog looks up at the scorpion, and the scorpion starts to sting the frog to death. As the frog starts to drown, and the scorpion with him starts to drown, the frog looks at the scorpion looks at the frog, and then the frog says, "Why'd you do that? We're almost home." And the scorpion looks at the frog just as they're about to go under the water and says, "Because I'm a scorpion." The end. Todorov argues that there are three parts to any story: an equilibrium, a disequilibrium, something comes along to disrupt the balance, and at the end, a new equilibrium. It's quite simple, but quite sophisticated, I think. Whether it be using fables like the one I just shared with you, or whether it be using fairy tales like the ones I read my daughter, or whether it be the Marvel movies that you young people like so much, or whether it be a newspaper article, whether it be a social media cancellation of a popular figure. There typically is an equilibrium, that is a balance, the way things are. The frog is leaving work at the end of the day, trying to get home, balance, normal. And there's a disequilibrium, something comes along to change the balance and is a threat to the equilibrium, in the sense that things might change, not necessarily for the better, but potentially for the better, but change. That's a disequilibrium. In the context of our story, might be the scorpion asking for that lift home. The new equilibrium at the end is the state of play. At the end, the new balance, as it were. The restoration of a new equilibrium, or the restoration, or perhaps regeneration of a new way of thinking of a balance in the universe. Beginning, middle, end. Equilibrium, disequilibrium, new equilibrium. In our story of the frog and the scorpion, the ending was quite sad, wasn't it? In terms of it being the death of both characters, which was quite tragic, really. Think about classic fairy tales in terms of equilibrium. Think about the way that they are structured. Classic storytelling withstands the test of time for a reason. At the heart of stories and narratives are morals that are consciously or subconsciously imbuing a culture and our understanding. For example, a slide I clicked past quite quickly there. In this story here, there's implicit, if not explicit, the idea of listening to your parents. Don't stray from the path. There are wolves out to get you. This reinforcement of a certain ideology is there. And in fairy tales and all media, there is that ideological underpinning. It's not neutral. So think about these things. If you can pick up on these elements, these themes, then you're really showing that higher level critical thinking skill set. But as I've said before, these slides are designed for you to explore and to read rather than me to read at you. I just wanted to give you something today to look through, because I'm not there with you, am I? I'm looking after my daughter who's unwell today. Todorov argues that narrative involves transformation. It's quite a nice phrase. So, think about your narrative for your project. Think about whether Todorov's theory applies to what you're doing. If you can't apply it to yours, then speak to each other in the group chat or message me But if you can't, then maybe apply it to another media text that you've encountered where you think, you know what, I think it relates to this example of this film or this animation, whatever it might be. So, if you're on ClickView, it'll pop up in just a minute. If you're on YouTube, put a comment underneath. Sidfield. So Sidfield's theory is like a more sophisticated, more detailed version of Todorov's, I would argue. Let's move myself out of the way here. So Sidfield argues that there are the three elements that Todorov outlines, that are the equilibrium, disequilibrium, and new equilibrium. But there are different beats, as it were, en route to that final climax. At the beginning, there's an inciting incident. Something happens to get us set off, whether that be a murder, whether that be a war, whether that be a relative coming to town, whether that be somebody getting married, whether that be an injury, whether that be some trauma, perhaps. Now, as we proceed into Act 2, we have a plot point 1, where something in the plot, the story, shifts. Act 2 is split into two halves here. The first half has what's called a pinch, and the second half has a pinch as well. In Act 2, there's a confrontation, there is a bit of a standoff before we head towards Act 3, which has its resolution of the confrontation and the climax, of course, at the end here as well. Now, what I've done is I have outlined here what pinch points are. They're nothing more or less than a reminder of the antagonistic force's power to get in the way of the protagonist's goal. The antagonist is the bad guy, essentially. But sometimes there is not a literal bad guy. Sometimes there are evil forces at play, are more symbolic. Maybe it's the environment, maybe it's some unseen nature, like bad luck, for example. Pinch points are those reminders of the force's power to get in the way of the goal, so things to stop our hero from getting to their goal. There are 2 pinch points, so says Sidfield, typically in Act 2, before we get to our climax. So I've given you an outline here, which you can take a look at in relation to Act 1, Act 2 and Act 3, in how it might look in a typical story. Again, the slide deck is there for you to delve deeper into. Classic example from Speed, provided by another media teacher years ago that I've yoinked and put here, gives another overview of how Sidfield's theory applies to a classic Hollywood structure. So, on the next slide, or if you're on ClickView, there'll be a box to put your answer in. If you're on YouTube, put it in the comments. Can you relate Sidfield's theory to your current project or any existing media text? Vladimir Propp. So Vladimir Propp argues that there are 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 different types of characters. Now, this is something you might have heard before, but Propp did a deep dive on folk stories and found different archetypes, that is, models that recurred and repeated and throughout different cultures became these figures that he argues, and the psychologist Carl Jung goes even deeper into this, repeat culturally in our shared unconscious, as it were. But we won't get into the degree stuff yet, we're just talking at level 3 standard here in terms of characters in stories. Propp argues that stories are character driven and that there are certain character types that repeat. They're often sometimes a combination of 2 or 3 of these, or even more. But typically, every narrative has at least some of these stories, if not all. At least some of these characters, if not all of them. He claimed characters could be classified into certain roles that progress a story. So let's take a look. The villain. This is somewhat of an antagonistic character who stands against our hero and their progress, often responsible for the pinch points that Sidfield identifies in the previous theory. The helper, that is the sidekick, the enabler, the assister, the Sam to Frodo, as it were. The princess or the prize. This is something to achieve. Isn't literally a princess every time. Could be an item. Could be a jewel. Could be a award. Something to chase after. The father figure, not always present. Someone older, might be an obstacle, might be someone more dominant, like a matriarch or patriarch figure. The donor, somebody who gives something special, clues, riddles, assistance to the hero en route to their resolution. The hero, this is typically our main character, someone who leads the narrative, someone who we see through. The good guy, typically. The false hero, someone who's initially mistaken for the hero, it turns into an obstacle for the hero. So that might be somebody who's starts off maybe as a donor or a helper, but might reveal themselves as the false hero. And there's the dispatcher. It's the person that sends the hero on their mission. So somebody who sets off the tail, as it were. So think about your narrative in your current project. Can you relate any of these characters to what you are currently doing? If not, and you might not be able to because what your project currently is might not relate, I still want you to apply it though, that terminology of props, concept of these different character types. Can you relate it to any media text? If you're on ClickView, box will pop up. If you're using the slides, please add it into the next slide on the slide deck. If you're doing it on YouTube, add a comment underneath. Single goal plot. Quite a simple, really, single goal plot. The protagonist, the good guy as it were, has one problem to solve before the end of the story. These are quite old-fashioned in the sense that they are the original stories, folk tales that we shared as early civilizations. But often quite formulaic, simple stories, media might also share this as well. Linear, that is beginning, middle and end, and quite predictable, somewhat cliched. Can you think of any examples of a text whereby you've seen a single goal plot and a story that is very simple and proceeds in a linear way with just one goal, one simple target that is achieved? Two goal plots. This is most films nowadays, really. Now, two goal plots often involves the character, the protagonist, striving for a goal and then learning something that changes what their initial goal was, and then they go for the real goal instead. They realise what they initially are setting out for isn't what they want at all. They need something else. Think about films in particular. You might find a nice example here to illustrate this, because this is the most common plot type. Two goal plot. Can you give me an example? Here are some additional narrative theories for you. Deus Ex Machina. Can you think of any examples of this? And again, the slide deck has some media for you to look deeper into. I'm sorry, it's a Watch Mojo video. I know that isn't particularly cool these days to embed one of those, but there's some good examples in here. Spoilers though. In ancient Greek and Roman drama, Deus Ex Machina was sort of a way to resolve a plot quite quickly. Basically, the gods come down and resolved everything and fixed everything. If the plot got too tangled in the third act, Zeus or Apollo would come down and just fix everything. Bit of a cop-out, really, in the modern sense of storytelling. If there's a Deus Ex Machina where just something is resolved really quickly at the end, then the audience tends to feel like, it's a bit artificial, it's a bit improbable. All those difficulties, all that investment in the character has just been tied up all neatly. Doesn't ring true. It's not like real life. We tend to demand a bit more these days, but it still is used. Can you think of any Deus Ex Machina examples? God of the Machines, I believe, is the translation there. An antagonist. Can you think of an antagonist? A bad guy, a wrong 'un, an opposition to the hero in your story or any other media texts? Let me know. Denouement. The denouement consists of a series of events that tend to follow after the climax, so the bit after the ending, as it were, whereby we've come to the end of our story and it serves as a conclusion, as it were, a tying up of the story. Conflicts are resolved, normality is restored, the new equilibrium is made clear, and can be useful for providing a sense of catharsis and release for the audience in terms of, okay, I know what's happened to these characters I've invested so much time in. Can you think of an example of denouement, something that follows the climax of a story, a narrative, in your work or an existing media text? This is a relatively new one on me, and something that I think is quite brilliant, actually. The story circle. This is based on the work of Joseph Campbell and his work as an anthropologist, a studier, someone who studies human kind, I suppose, and tries to get a better read on our habits, our rituals, our approaches, our narratives, our way of working in the world. He looks at different stories and created this sense of the hero's journey. Dan Harmon, who you may know from the wonderful show Community, but more likely you know him from Rick and Morty, he takes this model and applies it and has evolved it, as you can see here, into this story circle, which is very sophisticated and very satisfying to use. There are 8 essential steps that can guide almost any story from the beginning to the end. So establishing the protagonist, something isn't right, that need point for the character, crossing the threshold, going over the line to enter the fray, as it were, searching the road of trials and tribulations, testing oneself before finding, whatever that might be, the goddess, as it were, the thing you think you're aiming for. Number 6, taking. That is paying the price for what you've taken. There's a cost. And point number 7, trying to get home with that thing you've taken. Number 8, changing. The master of both worlds. So trying to make peace with the changes there and the things you've taken and the impacts of what you've done. So we go from order through chaos, returning back to order in that story circle. This is a really interesting video I've embedded here that outlines Dan Harmon's story circle. It's really nice. Studio Binder done a really fine job with this. I've also given you a template of how to actually structure a story using the story circle, which is in docs.google.com under templates if you want to look at that. The template here for you as well. Unlikely that you have applied this to your own work so far, but well worth your time. Another one that's well worth your time is the Pixar story spine. So the Pixar story spine is very elegant, very simple in terms of providing 8 beats, as it were, to structure a story. The Pixar team is how they start all those incredible tales. Once upon a time, every day, until one day, because of that, until finally, and ever since then. That's the structure of every Pixar story. Does that apply to your work? Can you think of any examples of stories, narratives whereby that applies? Well worth getting into your vocabulary, this approach of thinking about stories. Really nice, and something I've been using quite a bit in terms of projects I'm working on. So I thought I'd leave that for you there as well, in case you want to revisit it. Also put some links in the slide deck for you as well. YouTube playlist, a nice podcast on narrative as a way of structuring society, which is something I'm really interested in. There's a plot generator there as well, which is quite fun to play with as well, to get you thinking about a story. Okay, so again, apologies I can't be there with you in person, but this will hopefully communicate to you my intention, which was to go over how narrative can be used. Narrative theories can be used to enhance and enrich and underpin our use of stories in media, whatever media that might be. Any questions, as always, message me. I'm about. I only teach you guys 1 day a week now, but if you want a one-to-one with me, you can book it in via Google Chat. I'll send you my Calendly, and you can book in a time, half hour that suits you, okay? Hopefully, my friends, that was useful.